Hey, my name is Matt Stohrer, and I repair saxophones for a living. Today I'd like to talk to you about your chromatic fingerings for side C, side B flat, and side F sharp, and their relationship to the rest of the instrument and how you can set them up during an overhaul. Now, we're going to be talking about this from principle. So basically, the way the saxophone works is that whatever note you're playing, it comes out of that first open tone hole. So if I'm playing B, right, and you can finger on your saxophone and look at this yourself, you can see that the bis, the A, and the G are open, and then the G sharp is closed, and then the lower stack is open. So I've got 1, 2, 3 tone holes that this comes out of before there's a closed tone hole. When I finger A, it closes the bis and the A, and there's one open tone hole, followed by a closed tone hole, followed by a bunch of open tone holes. Now, the amount of venting that a note has in your saxophone is going to affect its response and its intonation. And if it's undervented a lot, then it'll actually feel like a leak. It'll kind of back up on you and be unstable. So you can adjust the way an instrument feels, and you can adjust the intonation by the amount of venting that it has. So, in other words, you can control these side keys. You can control their intonation because they're independent of any other keys. They're not hooked into other stuff like on the lower stack, right? So you can control the intonation of these side fingerings independently of anything else just by having them open up more or less, right? So when a repairman does this job, they can decide exactly how these side keys work and how they respond relative to the rest of the instrument, how they intonate relative to the rest of the instrument. And a common mistake is that people actually make these keys match up exactly with the intonation on the normal fingerings. But if you look at how you normally finger C, right, you've got closed tone hole, one open tone hole, closed tone hole, closed tone hole, open tone hole, closed tone hole. That's way undervented compared to most notes on the instrument. Same with F sharp, right? You've got open tone hole, closed tone hole, open tone hole, closed tone hole. So that is undervented, right? So that is naturally going to have the response and the intonation. The response is going to be a little bit backed up, a little bit stuffy. The intonation is going to be a little bit flatter than it might be otherwise if it was more well vented. Now, if you play those two notes with a side fingering, side C, right, you've got open tone hole, open tone hole, open tone hole, open tone hole, closed tone hole, right, on a side C, versus the normal fingering is open tone hole, closed tone hole, closed tone hole, open tone hole, right? So the venting is much better on side C. Similarly with chromatic F sharp, right? Instead of open tone hole, closed tone hole, open tone hole with regular F sharp, you've got open tone hole, open tone hole, open tone hole before the next closed tone hole. So these are vented very, very well, and they're independently adjustable. Now, a lot of times people try and make these match, right? So you play this F sharp, you switch to this F sharp, and they sound exactly the same. But there's not much of a point in doing that because one of these is actually much better acoustically than the other, and it's independent. Now, something that'll tell you a bit about the how this was thought about and how this was originally designed, and the reason this is here is old-timers used to call side C ballad C, because when you held it for a long time and you needed good intonation, you played side C, right? So if you set an instrument up to where an undervented note like C or F sharp plays perfectly in tune, that may mean that your key heights are too open for the rest of the horn where it's actually well vented, right? So that's one mistake you can make. Now, it's not always the case, right? But that's something to watch out for. But also, if you've got an undervented note, which is going to have sort of a stuffy character, and you try and make a well-vented note match with it, then you're going to be underventing your side F sharp, right? And it's not going to play as clear as it could. So instead of having your F sharp and your C sound the same on side C and front C, actually front C is probably going to be less nice of a note to play than side C, right? Side C, there's no reason for it not to be perfectly in tune because it's independently adjustable, right? It's not lined up with anything else. It's not attached to anything else. Same with chromatic F sharp. Side C and chromatic F sharp should be perfectly in tune. If there's any variation in intonation, if there's any problem with intonation, it should be in the standard fingering because those are undervented by design. These are kind of like cheater fingerings. They're a lot easier to do, but this is the properly vented fingering, right? That's the cheater fingering. That's the one we use normally. Side C, that's the proper fingering that's vented well. Same thing with F sharp. Now, side B flat is a little bit different, right? Because basically there's just no great way to finger this, right? Depends on what you're using. You can't use the same fingering for everything you play, depending on where you're coming from. Now, bis has two open tone holes and a closed tone hole, open tone holes. Side B flat has 1, 2 open tone holes, closed tone hole, open tone hole. So these are actually the same. So in this case, bis and side B flat should play and sound and feel exactly the same. They should intonate the same, they should sound the same, they should feel the same, because they're vented the same way. So those two should match. If you switch back and forth between bis and side B flat, they should sound exactly the same. But if you're switching back and forth between normal fingering F sharp and chromatic F sharp, the chromatic F sharp should be clearer sounding, and it might be even a little bit raised in pitch, but it should be in tune, right? Same thing with front C versus side C. Side C should sound clearer, right? Because much more well vented. If you have it sound like an undervented note, then probably that means it's undervented, right? And if anything, side C will be perfectly in tune, while front C might be a tiny bit flat. So based on the way the saxophone is designed, these fingerings, which are the only 3 alternate fingerings built into the instrument, are built there for 2 different reasons. The side C and the side F sharp are built in because the normal cheat fingerings are actually undervented, and there's nothing you can do about that, just the mechanics of the instrument. We've got more notes to play than we have fingers. Side B flat is put on there because bis isn't always a good solution. Now obviously you've got the 1-in-1 B flat, but that is acoustically not great, and it usually sounds pretty bad. And also just mechanically, the way it's put together, it's not the one you want to count on, but you can use it in a pinch if you need to. It's nice to have it as a backup. But bis or side B flat are both totally fine. They sound the same, intonate the same. But side C is a more acoustically perfect note than front C. Side F sharp is a more acoustically perfect note than regular F sharp. So when you're setting up your instrument, when you're testing your instrument, if those sound differently, there's actually a reason. They're not supposed to sound exactly the same, in my opinion, based on the principles of saxophone design. And just, looking at the horn. So people ask me that question a lot about how those should be set up, and that's my opinion. Now, ideally, when an instrument is set up well, if it's designed well, if it's a good instrument, then the variation between front C and side C, front F sharp and side F sharp will be minimal, but in my experience, it's always there, and you don't want to think about it like they need to be the same. They actually should be slightly different because one is correct acoustically and one is not. So I hope you found that helpful, useful, informative. My name is Matt Stohrer. I repair saxophones for a living, and that was my long-winded answer to a question I get an awful lot about how to set up the alternate fingerings on side C, side B flat, and chromatic F sharp.